Megan from, now, how do you say it? La Maree? Is that,
Yes,
did I say
yes,
it right?
yes. Good.
And so La Maree Art, and so now I read on your website that that's a French word for tide. And
Yeah.
so, which after looking at what you do, everything really, kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Fits.
Um, so how long have you been doing this type of art?
So, art in general has always been just a huge part of me.
Yeah.
I didn't study art in school. It was always just kind of like a therapeutic outlet, if you will.
Mm, hmm.
And so I stumbled into working with epoxy, more or less out of boredom. I was sort of looking for something to do. It was like winter in Maine. It's dark at 5 o'clock. It's,
Yeah.
trying to uplift myself a bit. And I stumbled into river tables.
Okay.
Have you ever seen what a river table might
Yeah,
look
where you've got like two pieces of wood and people, put that epoxy in the middle and then do all of the stuff, right? Is that?
like? Yes.
Yeah.
And so this was, let's see, I moved back home in 2017. And then all of these like river table videos somehow just start, you watch one and then there's 18 on your.
You go down a huge rabbit hole of like,
Yeah. And that was the first time I was like, ooh, epoxy
hmm.
looks really cool. I want to play with it.
Yeah. So what type of art did you do before? So what were some of the things that, was it like drawing? Was it painting? Like how was your um yeah, I guess what was just that art before you started looking at epoxies?
Yeah. So it was when I was little, like every kid, you like draw stick figures. That's fun and dandy. And then I realized I'm just really not good at drawing. Just put
Yeah.
down the pencil and I picked up a paintbrush. And that's when I really fell in love. And it was like painting and mostly like landscapes. And it was always drawn towards the water,
Mm.
or flowers. My parents have this huge painting I did in high school that is the portrait of a man that I made only painting with flowers. So
Oh,
his face
wow.
is like these little tiny, like beige colored flowers, and then his ear is like a petal.
That's
Wild.
wild. Yeah.
And and then from there I went into more like abstract painting. And again, this was always just sort of like for me, for fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I loved how you start with something blank and just sort of, I never had a plan. And I think that's why I
Yeah.
love epoxy, is it's so unpredictable.
Yeah. And it's kind of just wherever it takes you, right? Wherever your creativity takes you and
Yeah,
whatever feels good that day, you start to just kind of go in that direction, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I get a lot of therapy from like baking. So for me, I can get lost for a couple of hours just, just into that process. But I would imagine this is that same thing, right? You kind of get lost in the process of creating your art and you just
yeah.
let your imagination and your mind flow.
I mean, very similar to baking. You start with something totally different than what you end with. And, you're making muffins or bread, or you might add some chocolate chips, or you might be like, ooh, actually, I forgot I had these almonds. I'm going to throw them in there. And it's very similar with art.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you first started working with epoxy, I would imagine that's a whole nother level, right? Like of all of a sudden understanding what this mixture does, how fast it dries, and like, okay, if I wanted to do this, then I've got to. So how were the first like few things that you started to work with?
So now there's all different kinds of epoxies everywhere. But
Mm,
for some reason, when I first started, I had a really hard time finding good epoxies. And also, epoxy is so expensive that when you're just playing, you don't want to be spending that much money on something that might come out okay. And
hmm.
so I was going to Home Depot or Lowe's, and I was just buying like whatever epoxy they had there. And that stuff is just such an industrial epoxy. It's so smelly.
Mm,
It now knowing it doesn't work anything like, like the workability and the way that it mixes with color pigments is totally different than the
mm.
epoxy I use now. So those first initial processes were all over the place. I mean, there was, I have my shoes had epoxy. You don't know how much it's gonna like run all over the place. And
But that's a
and then I
good,
had like
but that's a good thing, right? Like, that you needed to start with something, but you just have
yeah,
no idea what it's going to do. So yeah, why not start with some of that? You get a feel and an idea, and then you become just better at it. And then you start to work with a better quality and you're like, oh, this is so much easier. This is
yes.
so much different. And then, but it's a learning process, just like anything else, right? Just because you're an artist in this capacity and it was painting before, you still are this artist, but you have to learn almost a whole new medium.
Exactly. And it definitely the kind of epoxy you use, each one is so different and they all react so differently and they all have different cure times and different viscosities. And so I always like to say it's like painting with maple syrup. It's like I think it's going to do this, but then if it's slightly unlevel, it does something else. And
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it is very interesting. And it's a medium that always keeps me on my toes.
Yeah. And so once you first started with it, when did you know that, like, this is really cool and there's something here that I want to potentially turn into a business?
Yeah. So, as someone who's always loved art, I mean, that was always a dream. Like, how can I pay my bills by selling
Mm.
something I'm so passionate about? And of course, starving artist isn't a coined term for nothing, right? So, it was daunting for sure.
And so
And
how long were you thinking about doing this? Like, was it something that once you started painting, even in high school, you had thoughts of kind of, I'd like to do this as a career?
So I studied French and psychology in college, and then I went off. I moved out to France, and I lived in France for almost 4 years, where I
Mm.
started my master's in psychology. So art as a career was never really on the board for me.
Gotcha.
Again, just because it's so untraditional, and it's not. It's you go to college and you get your degree and you go get a real job, if you will. And feel so lucky and fortunate that I did not put myself in that cookie cutter. And I will say it was like the scariest and probably wildest thing I tried. And it was
Yeah.
at a sort of transitional point in my life, if you will, where I just said, fuck it, let's see what happens.
Let's go. Well, and you have to kind of take that jump and take that leap. And the older you get, the harder it is,
Yes.
because the other responsibilities and all of those things that kind of come into play. But in order for you to live life with purpose and follow your passions and do these different things, potentially it doesn't look in this 9 to 5 capacity. But it's kind of what we grow up in, and it's kind of that, okay, here's that safe and secure route, and you'll have this type of life, and you can have that expectation. But then there is that, really, that I think we all have that thing inside us that makes us unique, that says, okay, well, sitting in an office from 9 to 5 just doesn't really fit with me, and it's not it's not what is going to serve me best. So it is a very scary thing to think about doing all of this stuff on your own. It's a little, again, it's easier to be a starving artist in, let's just say, your 20s than your 40s.
And
So
to your point, in my 20s, I was thinking, the deciding factor was if I don't try, I'm always going to wonder what if.
yeah,
And
yeah.
if it doesn't work out, at least I know now and turn the page and I still have a degree and I go do something else. And I'm so happy that, the hard work I put into everything, what I was hoping for came to fruition. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so you were saying, so as far as, kind of taking that leap and starting with this career, obviously you started with the painting and then kind of worked into the epoxy. At one point, did you start working with it that you said there's something here where people are going to, kind of buy it or
Yeah.
look to buy it?
So, not soon after I started. So I started playing with it, let's say in probably November. And then there was like a local, like this really tiny but local Christmas market at like the local armory.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached out to them and I had started doing all these things and I was like, oh, I think this is cool and I'm not really seeing it anywhere. And who knows? Let me just try and see what kind of feedback I get. And that small little Christmas show, the woman next to me was the sweetest old lady who was knitting little like little towels, and she just kept like winking at me the whole time.
Mm.
And it was memorable for multiple reasons, but it just worked out way better than I had anticipated. And at that point, I think I realized I think I'm onto something. I need to tweak my craft a little bit, but I really think I
Mm.
have something here.
Yeah. And so how many pieces did you go in with and did you sell them all?
Yeah, so it was, I think, a 2-day market, and I went in with two sort of kitty cornered 6-foot tables. I just filled them. So I had bought like plate racks, and I just had put them, in the plate racks like that. And I went home with maybe like a half a table of them or something. And of course, it's Christmas time; people are scrambling around, so that was something to take into consideration. Is everything sells quicker and faster this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
But even that I had started a few months before and had already started or feeling like I had got a little bit of traction was a
Yeah.
huge motivating factor in my decision to do it full time.
And so I know so you do a lot of cut. What was the decision to kind of look at the pieces that you were going to sell, like cutting boards and then wall art? So how did you decide on what were going to be the pieces that you put your art on?
So I love the wall art. That is my heart and soul. It's what
Mm,
I really am passionate about, but it does not appeal to such a broad audience as the serving boards. And so for me, it was something that if I really want to make this a full-time job, I need to find a way to appeal to the most amount of people possible while still doing something that I love.
yes,
And and so then I was thinking, okay, can I do like little coffee tables? Can I do, like little side tables? And I was just so inexperienced, not only with epoxy, but also woodworking,
sure.
that, making these ginormous tables just felt like too much of a leap. Um, and of course, I wanted to make this a long-term business. So could I
Mm.
have made a table? Sure. But would it have been great quality where people would have come back? Probably not.
It's almost like you would have had to learn a whole new trade to then combine those two things versus, yeah.
Gradually, which again, now, I mean, I have learned how to use so many tools. It's really and so that's how the serving boards came into play. I was in at my parents' house, and my dad always has wood stuff laying around, and I had this extra epoxy that I had left over from this, I don't know, experiment I was doing, if you will. And I didn't want to waste the epoxy. And so I had taken one of his, which I found it was oak. I didn't know at the time. And he was like, Meg, you could have picked any other wood here. You picked the most expensive one. And, um, and I just sort of covered that half with epoxy, and it came out so cool. And that was sort of how things spurred and started rolling.
That's amazing. And how fun, like, that it's like, okay, well, here's what I love to do. And even though there's a market for that, again, you want to make a business and you still get to do what you do, but now you get to do that where, you can appeal to a mass market.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because not everyone is gonna have that taste to put that art up on the wall, but everyone's going to look at that and be like, this is super cool. I would love this piece. And then, give that. And I would imagine you probably get a lot of people who give these as gifts and things of that nature, because it's, you always look for unique things
Yeah.
to give to people. And this is certainly one of those pieces.
Definitely. And especially, wedding gifts and things. I think a big thing for me with the serving boards is that it's functional art. Like we love doing appetizers. My parents will have just cut cheese on a board all the time. And it's always like this ugly cut up piece of bamboo. And so, having a way, or, you're using a cutting board, you're cutting on the cutting board, and then you're placing all of that onto another dish or tray. And then you're just making extra dishes. And so finding the way to sort of combine both, where you have a functional piece that you can absolutely cut on, but then you're also serving on it and it looks nice, was something that when it clicked, it was really like, okay, I should run with this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And once you started running with that, I mean, it's kind of taken off, because, looking at the different magazines that have, written things about you and published your art. And then I think what was it, Decor magazine that had you as one of the, top 10 artists to watch in Maine.
Yeah.
Or like, how fantastic is that?
Yeah, that was so crazy. I did not expect that at all. And that was the first year that I went full time. And then they just called me up, hey, we want to feature in this. What do you think? And I was like, yes. You want me to say no?
Do you have any idea how they found you or anything like that? Did they just
I try, I don't know. I think when I asked them, they said that someone stumbled upon a picture on Instagram. I also sell in like local shops. And so I don't know exactly. I did not reach out to them, which was why I was extra excited about it. So I don't know for sure. I should have asked that.
Yeah, well, it's, but it's all fun, and that's the power of social media, right? Like, you put these things out there, and it's just amazing how, because it is such interesting work and it's all handmade, that people are just drawn to it, and it's fun, because who doesn't love the water? And so I would imagine, coming from Maine, I see pictures. You have an amazing picture with a surfboard that is. Now, is that your surfboard? Do you use that, or, has surfing always been something that you tried or love?
So I am not a surfer. I tried once and it was a disaster.
Yeah.
And also that surfboard is a wooden cutout, so it doesn't even float.
It's not really gotcha. Yeah.
But I did after, so I got so much. I mean, that was just like a really fun, I just cut it out and I didn't put too much thought into it. And then everyone was like, wow, that's cool. And so I actually bought a real surfboard, used, of course, because I don't surf and they're so expensive. And I'm going to refinish it. And so I'm in the process of sort of sanding it down and doing all that so that I can do the same thing I did on the wooden surfboard, but actually have a floating real surfboard.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And do you ever do like custom pieces for people? How does that work?
Yeah. So custom pieces are sort of, people usually just reach out and they just say, hey, I'm really looking for this or that, this size. I have a wedding coming up. The person, I just did this really cool custom cribbage board. Where the inlay was the island that the couple got married on. And
wow.
And then, on the side, we just engraved their name and date. And those kinds of things are always fun because it's super personalized, but it's also sort of something out of the ordinary of what I'm used to doing. And then custom orders, when it comes to wall art, is basically people usually know exactly what they want. They're like, hey, I have this space. I want to fill it. These are the colors I'm looking for. What can you do?
Yeah, no, that's fun. And so as you're looking to kind of the future of what this business is, because it's not like it's that old, right? I mean, you've been doing this for like 3 or 4 years, is that correct?
Like three full time for like two-ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so as amazing as this is, where do you have ideas for what you want to do with the business in the future?
So yes and no. I think the beauty of the business is that it just sort of became a business. My goal was never, oh, I'm going to create this huge, growing, wild business. It was just kind of like, well, I'm making money as if it were a business, so I should probably do the official things to make it one. And ultimately my goal for this is really to grow in a way that I am comfortable with, and not in a way of, okay, I need to make the most money possible, I need to get my product out to the most
Yeah.
places. And my worst fear is getting to a place where this passion of mine turns into a stress and something that I don't enjoy doing anymore, because
Hmm.
I've pushed myself to the end of my limits.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
but with that said, I want it. I love watching it grow, and I love seeing, all the efforts that I put in really making a difference, and looking at where I was only a year ago, and pushing through COVID, and being able to
Oh
really
yeah.
sustain everything has been a huge motivator.
Well, because I would imagine that you would get a lot of people, especially if you sell in areas of Maine that have a lot of potential tourists and things of that nature, that you could potentially sell a lot that way. But last year, with things being what they were, there's really not that opportunity. So being able to sell online and sustain the business is fantastic. Do you get folks coming to you who are interested in art and looking for advice, things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, resin art, you can look now, is all over the place. I mean, I caught on, and then somebody else caught on, and then, I think it was sort of, we're multiple people that were like, oh, this is cool at the same time. And so you always get, and particularly on social media, when somebody will say, hey, this is really great. I'm trying to do similar things, and I'm really struggling with this or that. Have you had the same struggles? Or if you have, what do you recommend? And what products do you use? And
Yeah.
so it's interesting. I always want to help people, but I think as well, there's a huge part of the artistic process that is making mistakes and discovering what works best for you, because something that I love and my style of doing things is not necessarily going to be the style of my neighbor.
Hmm.
And there's also that beauty in the process.
And that's really what art is, right? It's the process.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, we all look at art as this end result, but
Mhm.
it's the process to get to that end result that is truly, the art that kind of goes into all of that. And so how did was it just from kind of playing around that you realized all of the things that you needed to do in order to make this look the way that it was?
Yeah. So it's also playing with different products, right? So if one doesn't give you the right effect, try something else and try something else. And I went through so many different color pigments before
Oh
I
yeah.
found the ones that I really love. And it's something, to your point, it's the process and the backstory that you don't see in the final product. And the colors make a huge difference. And so that was a huge part of it, and very interesting. Always keeps me on my toes.
Yeah. And so is this kind of the only form of art now? Do you still do other things to, express your creativity?
Yes and no. I will say it is such a it consumes so much of my time now, and especially since I'm not just doing wall art. I'm always working with wood and molds. And then you find out that, oh, I went to the lumberyard and they had this really crazy cool walnut piece. What can I do with that? And so I really have been sort of engulfed in epoxy lately, and woodworking, because there's just so many different avenues
Mhm.
and different things that you can create out of just one hunk of wood, that it's really kept me busy, and it's my creative mind has just been sort of winding since.
I
So
love that. That's fantastic. And so, um, I want to be cognizant of time, and I appreciate you spending some time with me. Um, what's the maybe one piece of advice that you might have for other artists that are trying to discover, trying to find their voice and kind of find their way? How is there any advice that you have that that you typically give out to folks?
yeah, I mean, I would just say trust your gut. I mean, you have so many different voices telling you what you should do and how you should do it, and what your art should look like. And ultimately, art is the most subjective profession. And if there's anything I've learned in the process, is that when I listen to other people, I wish I had listened to myself in
Yes.
that first step. And
That's just such a good life lesson, though. It really is because, who knows us better than us? And so when we take in everyone else's opinions, all of a sudden we can become a person that we don't really, really want to be. And so we only get one go at this. So be that person that you want to be and create that art that you want to create.
absolutely.
And so that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Megan, this has been an amazing conversation, really kind of getting to know you and getting to know your art. Where can people, find, where can they buy your art? I know you said there's lots of local places, in Maine. Are there shops where, people might be able to go to
Mhm.
as they're, traveling to different parts of Maine?
Yeah, so all of the shops that I sell in are listed on my website, and it's just www.lamareeart.com.
Yeah.
And then you can even search and you can put the zip code that you're going to be in, and it will give you everything that's sort of around that. And then, of course, my website, I ship everywhere. So
Yeah.
there are
And
no bad places.
yeah, and so I would imagine that getting to those, although those little shops, was that a challenge all within it itself, is kind of going to these different places and talking to them about, selling your stuff?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it takes a little bit of courage. You know, when you're bringing in your art to somebody else, you're always sort of opening yourself up. Like there's that vulnerability of like, ooh, will they like it? So that would be the difficult part. I think that the easier side of things for me was just that I don't have a common product. And so most of the shops that I went to were seeing something new.
Hmm.
An obstacle is just that also that it's new, and people are looking at it like, what is this? What do I do
Hmm.
with it? But it has been an adventure, and a great one, sort of finding the right shops and the right fits. And
Yeah.
so
Well, I applaud you because it takes a lot of courage and a lot of vulnerability to put yourself out there the way that you have, but then it's also so rewarding, correct?
yeah,
To then be in this spot, regardless of how much you had to step outside of a comfort zone in order to do that.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, Megan, congratulations on your business, on your art. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Congratulations on being a role model for other people to follow their passions and to follow their purpose and to be able to create a space and a business out of something that you love, which is amazing. So,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah.